Now, with the economic cost of COVID-19 growing, it raises serious questions about the country's financial health. Do years of austerity now lie ahead? It's left some world leaders spooked. President Trump has suggested the deaths caused by a recession could even outweigh those caused by the virus. Well, in a landmark report that was published earlier this year, the country's leading voice on health inequality here in the UK, Sir Michael Mermot, said that life expectancy had already stalled here. So could things now get even worse? Well, let's speak to Sir Michael. He's a professor of epidemiology and director of Institute of Health Equity at the University College London. He's in central London. So Michael, thank you so much for talking to us. I mean, I'd just like to get your initial reaction to the situation in which we find ourselves.
What's really interesting now, given this pandemic, is the government has said, whatever it takes. They've rightly decided to support the incomes of employed people and somewhat later of self-employed people. Absolutely right that they should be doing that. And I want to contrast it with my recent report, my 10 years on review, that in 2010, the government said, getting the deficit down, getting the national debt down is the number one priority. And they presented it almost with moral fervour. And that caused great damage. Health suffered as a result. Now, 10 years later, it's been thrown out the window. We can ramp up the debt and the deficit as much as is needed. And I think they're actually right to do that. But what it means is that that choice 10 years ago was a political choice that was not necessary. It was not necessary socially, it was not necessary politically, and it was not necessary economically.
So the argument is that back then it was about saving lives, just as it is about saving lives now, just on a greater scale now.
Had they not cut essential services, then they may well have saved lives and stopped health inequalities increasing. But in the interests of austerity, they cut early child development, they increased child poverty, they cut schooling, they cut funding to local government, the amenities that local government funded. All of those things got cut. And it looks like health was damaged as a result. What they're saying now is because health is under threat, we're prepared to spend whatever it takes. They should have said that 10 years ago. Now, I'm hoping that this will represent a new way of doing things.
So, Michael, you say it looks like, but as a scientist, I mean, is there proof of that?
Proof that austerity damaged the health of the population. What I said was that in 2010, we established to the satisfaction of the public health and scientific community the causes of health inequalities. Over the next 10 years, as my 10 years on review documents, most of those got worse. The things I've already mentioned, like child poverty, adult poverty, social services and the like. And it's highly likely that that rolling back of the state was responsible for the slowdown in improvement in health, the increase in health inequalities, and the actual decline in life expectancy for women in the poorest areas of the country. Highly likely. That's not proof, but it's highly likely. Certainly it was enough for us to recommend that those policies should be reversed.
I know it's early days now, but this is something that you've obviously spent many years studying. Looking at where we are now, how do you think we're going to come out of this?
Well, we're going to come out of this, in a sense, blinking in the sunlight, saying, now what? And I think that now what is a time to rethink how we want to do things. We shouldn't put gross domestic product, the growth of the GDP, as the number one priority. I would like us to put the health and well-being of the population as the number one priority, as we are now doing in response to the pandemic. And I'd like us to continue to do that. So as the country opens up again, as people go back to work, we should be asking, what is government for? And what I think government should be for is improving the health and well-being of the population and reducing inequalities. And in my 10 years on review, which I hope the government will pick up once this crisis is over, we've made what I think of as a series of constructive recommendations to the Prime Minister and to the government about how he can achieve his ambition for levelling up.
It's interesting because this pandemic is really all about the really difficult questions, isn't it? And if you look at the response that the government has had here in comparison to the response that we've seen in the United States, for instance, let's take a look there with Donald Trump really looking at balancing the effects that this lockdown is going to have on the economy compared to the effects on the health of people if they don't continue with the lockdown. And if you look at a specific figure, it's 2.2 trillion at the moment in the States. Do you think that this is about looking at the economic effects of a continued lockdown? It looks, lots of people, experts saying it could go on until June. Do you think we need to, as a nation, look at the economic effects compared to the health effects of the pandemic? Or should we go ahead and say, listen, it doesn't matter what it costs, every life is worth it?
Well, certainly, I think every life is worth it. But I would never counsel we should ignore the economic effects. It's a false balance. The idea that President Trump has been floating, he's not consistent about this, of course, as he rarely is, that he can reopen the country by Easter. He could, in the worst projections, be responsible for hundreds of thousands of extra deaths. What kind of equation is that? To put the health of the stock market in priority over the health of the population? Is that any kind of priority? This is neoliberalism gone crazy.
So do you think in general across the globe we're going to see a more sort of socialist society?
Well, I don't think of this as socialist. I don't think that that particular label's very helpful. Which is why the way I describe it as taking action to improve the health and well-being of the population and reduce inequalities. And that will take government action, national government, regional and local government. There's no question. And that's what this crisis has revealed to us, that the idea you can get away with minimal levels of government is quite wrong. We need expertise, we need government action, we need coordination, we need a properly funded health service, we need properly funded social services. I don't call that socialism. I call that a modern way to run an effective state.
Okay, so Michael, thank you so much for talking to us this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thank you.